then we also have to evaluate what terrain they live in. I can't give someone 20-minute efforts if they live in super rolling terrain as a coach. It's not effective. Like as a coach, I have to be careful about prescribing efforts that the athlete can actually execute on. Otherwise, it's just frustrating. If they live in Boston and they've got like bike paths to train on, I'm not going to give them 2x20 because then they become a pathlete.
Yeah.
Right. And that's dangerous for them and dangerous for everyone else. And right.
So what do you give them then?
Right. So it becomes quite creative. Maybe we do have them on the trainer for the longer efforts here and there when it's selective, even in warm weather, and we balance that with outdoor riding. You have to get creative, or you do the best you can. You give them, you can get a fair amount of aerobic benefit from 30-second maximal efforts with longer recovery that are peppered over a long endurance ride. And so they have 30 seconds of clear road and they know they can really whale it. This is an unconventional training technique, but you give them 8-10 of those over a 4-hour ride, then you're really, it's like you're flexing the mitochondria to a maximum and then letting them recover, and you're peppering that with endurance. So it's one way to solve one of those equations. But another principle I'll use to prescribe duration of intervals is, what physiological system do you want to train? Right? There are natural barriers for that. And we can use some software to look and see where somebody's exact duration of their glycolytic system is for a maximum effort. But it's not real rocket science. Like you make somebody go 45 seconds flat out, flat stick. Most people are going to be near the end of their glycolytic rope. So if you know that the athlete needs that type of effort and we want to spin up their ability to make those kinds of efforts, then we just hit them with that duration effort. And the recovery window depends on, again, what characteristics do you want to maximize? Do you really want to make them glycolytic? You give them long recovery. If you want more, if you want to blend and you want to make sure that they can respond to change in pace, because they tend to be diesels, but you're not necessarily worried about making their glycolytic engine bigger, then you might give them 45 on, 45 off, or 30-30s or Tabatas, right? These types of fluctuation intervals. Athletes who have a really hard time with change in pace, this is something that's hard to quantify. You just have to know it about a rider. You know, you can tease it out in questions pretty quickly. Like, do you like criteriums? How do you do in group rides? Oh, I really like it when we get on the big roads and I can just, plow along at 28 miles an hour. Okay. So, that would be my biggest thing, is the physiology of the rider, how they present now versus the demands of their event. So that will dictate what kind of intervals you want to prescribe, but also what are their strengths? Do they have a really high VO2 naturally, but they're a younger rider, but they can't time trial their way out of a paper bag? Like they just can't concentrate for 20 or 30 minutes straight. Then maybe physiologically, they don't need the efforts, but mentally they need a longer effort, a long tempo. I tend to prescribe a lot of tempos and progressive tempos. I like those a lot. Not a lot of tempos all the time, but I'll say it's a relatively common prescription at the right point in someone's program. And I'll also sometimes sneak it in at the end of a ride. So I'll give them a 4-hour ride, and then I'll give them finish with a 25-minute progressive tempo. But the last 5 minutes are going to be full open.
So progressive within the duration. It's not like a 87, 90, 93. It's just one interval where you stair stepping upwards.
Yeah.
Or what would you mean by progressive?
By progressive. Yeah, good question. Because you could evenly space it. And I do that sometimes. So I might give them a 15-minute that's like 5 minutes of tempo, 5 minutes of threshold, 5 minutes at VO2, for example, or maximal aerobic power might be a better way to say that. But a more common prescription for me is what I call ramp to infinity, otherwise known as a
Buzz Lightyear.
Yeah, Buzz Lightyear. Yeah. Or I'm forgetting the mathematical term.
Yeah.
Curve that goes like this. Jesus.
The
word is escaping my brain at the moment.
Oh my God, dude.
Yeah, it's right on the tip of my brain.
We just lost all credibility.
We did.
Not hyperbola.
Science.
Yeah, those things, those curvy lines.
Mercury with chalk. So, anyway, an infinite curve, we'll call it. And so most of the big, if you give someone a 25-minute tempo, 22.5 minutes of it might be actually within the tempo range. And then the last, then they're in threshold and then they're at MAP. But the way I really like to have them do it is really ramp up in the last few seconds, like a full-on sprint. And I like to see if they can hit even sprint power in the last 10 seconds. And the reason I like that is, one, I think physiologically it sort of builds momentum and it breaks people out of the threshold ceiling that they tend to live in. But the second is that I think physiologically it places an additional load on the mitochondria in a way that probably isn't too quantifiable. You're only doing a few seconds of very intense work, but you're doing it at the end of a long block of work at the end of a long ride. So there's a lot of cumulative weight of stress on the system there. So it's just one of those things that I carried over. Probably it comes down from, I would say it's probably a track thing that I adopted and adopted into road training, because on the track, you tend to do a lot of efforts that sort of build an intensity like that. And when you finish the effort, it's really flat out. Like one thing track separates from road is that the intensity just goes up because everything's shorter.